I'll create a detailed story for you based on the theme of family abandonment and selling a house in retaliation. Let me develop a comprehensive outline first, then write the complete 5,500-word story with all the required elements. My name is Margaret. I'm 64 years old, and I never imagined I'd be abandoned at a gas station by my own son and his wife during our cross-country trip. Standing there in the summer heat watching their car disappear down the highway with my grandchildren waving from the back window nearly broke me. What my son didn't realize was that I still legally owned the house they lived in, the one I'd paid for 15 years ago. Sometimes the most painful betrayals lead to the most necessary decisions. Before I tell you my story, drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that, even at my age, it's never too late to stand up for yourself. I'd always been close with my son Brian. As a single mother, I worked 2 jobs to make sure he had everything he needed growing up. After his father walked out when Brian was just 4 years old, it was just the 2 of us against the world. I cleaned office buildings at night and worked as a receptionist during the day, often running on just a few hours of sleep. But seeing Brian thrive made every sacrifice worth it. Brian was a bright child, always curious and eager to learn. He earned a scholarship to college, becoming the first person in our family to earn a degree. I couldn't have been prouder the day he graduated with honors in business management. When he got his first corporate job, I felt like all those years of hard work had finally paid off. My son would have opportunities I never had. Everything changed when Brian met Diane during a business conference in Chicago. Diane came from a wealthy family with connections in the real estate industry. She was beautiful, polished, and ambitious. Brian was immediately smitten. Within 6 months, they were engaged, and I tried my best to welcome her into our small family. From the beginning, Diane seemed uncomfortable with my modest lifestyle. I lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house where Brian grew up in a middle-class neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky. My furniture was well-worn but comfortable. My car was 10 years old but reliable. I'd never been one for luxury, preferring to save my money for emergencies and Brian's education. "You really should update your wardrobe, Margaret," Diane would say during her visits. "Those clothes make you look older than you are." Or, "Have you thought about moving to a retirement community? This house must be so much work for you." Brian and Diane married in an extravagant ceremony that Diane's parents mostly paid for. I contributed what I could, though Diane made it clear my offerings barely made a dent in their wedding budget. After the honeymoon, they settled in Phoenix, where both had found good jobs. I visited when I could, though the distance made it difficult. When Brian called me 5 years later with exciting news, I was thrilled. They'd found the perfect house in an upscale neighborhood but needed help with the down payment. The housing market was competitive and they needed to act quickly before someone else snatched it up. "Mom, we found our dream home," Brian explained over the phone. "It's in Paradise Valley with great schools for when we have kids, but we're a little short on the down payment." Without hesitation, I agreed to help. I'd been saving for years, living frugally and putting aside money that might have gone toward new furniture or vacations. I'd always planned to use that money to help Brian when he really needed it. This seemed like the perfect opportunity. I liquidated my investments and contributed $200,000 toward their down payment. My only request was that, for financial protection, I be listed as a co-owner on the deed until they could refinance and buy me out. Brian readily agreed, and Diane seemed surprisingly amenable to the arrangement. "We'll pay you back as soon as we can, Mom," Brian promised. "Maybe in 5 years or so." I never expected immediate repayment. Having my name on the deed was simply a formality, a way to protect my investment until they were more financially stable. What mattered most was helping my son and daughter-in-law build their future. Within 2 years, Brian and Diane welcomed twins Jackson and Emma. Becoming a grandmother was one of the greatest joys of my life. I flew to Phoenix as often as I could afford, staying in their guest room and helping with the babies. Diane seemed grateful for the extra hands, though I noticed she grew tense whenever I made suggestions about childcare. "We do things differently now, Margaret," she'd say, taking a crying Emma from my arms. "The pediatrician says this approach is best." I tried not to take offense, reminding myself that parenting advice had changed since I raised Brian. Still, I couldn't help feeling that Diane was establishing boundaries, reminding me that I was an outsider in their family unit. As the years passed, my visits became less frequent. Brian's calls grew shorter and more perfunctory. When I did visit, I noticed Diane would schedule social engagements during my stay, leaving me alone with the children, or suggesting I rest in my room. Brian seemed oblivious to the subtle ways his wife was pushing me to the periphery of their lives. 10 years after helping them buy the house, I realized they had never mentioned refinancing or paying me back. The deed still listed me as co-owner, a fact that seemed to have slipped everyone's mind except mine. I didn't press the issue, assuming they'd bring it up when they were ready. After all, family isn't about keeping ledgers. At least that's what I believed until the road trip that changed everything. The trouble began brewing long before we hit the road. When Brian called to invite me on their family vacation last summer, I was surprised and delighted. They were planning a 2-week cross-country trip from Phoenix to Washington, D.C., with stops at national parks and historical sites along the way. "The kids are at the perfect age for this," Brian explained, "and we thought you'd enjoy seeing the country with us." What Brian didn't mention until later was that the invitation came with conditions. "Mom Diane thinks it would be best if you contributed toward the expenses," Brian said awkwardly during a follow-up call. "The hotel's gas food for everyone adds up quickly." Although I was living on a fixed income from my pension and Social Security, I agreed to pay my share plus a little extra as a thank you for including me. I withdrew an additional $3,000 from my savings to ensure I wouldn't be a financial burden. The tension was palpable from the moment Brian picked me up at the Phoenix airport. Diane barely acknowledged my arrival, focusing instead on repacking the SUV to accommodate my small suitcase. The twins, now 12, were glued to their tablets and offered only perfunctory hugs when prompted by their father. "Kids remember what we talked about," Brian said pointedly. "Grandma's joining our special trip." Emma looked up briefly. "But where is she going to sit? I thought I got the whole back row to myself." "You'll have to share now," Diane replied, casting me an apologetic glance that didn't reach her eyes. Family means sacrifices. That first comment should have been my warning sign. For the first few days, things were civil, if not warm. We visited the Grand Canyon, where I took photos of the family posed against the majestic backdrop. We stopped at quirky roadside attractions where the kids momentarily disconnected from their devices and showed flashes of curiosity and joy. Each night, I had my own hotel room, which I'd insisted on paying for myself, despite Brian's half-hearted protests. The real trouble began in Colorado. Over breakfast at a local diner, I mentioned that I'd love to make a quick stop at Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs, just a 30-minute detour from our planned route. "We don't have time for that," Diane said sharply. "We have reservations in Denver tonight." "It's not far out of the way," I suggested gently. "The photos look beautiful, and I may never get another chance to see it." Brian looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between his wife and me. "Maybe we could squeeze it in," he offered tentatively. Diane's expression hardened. "We agreed on the itinerary months ago, Brian. We can't just change plans on a whim." "It's fine," I said quickly, not wanting to cause discord. "It was just a suggestion." Later that day, as we drove through the stunning Colorado landscape, Diane began complaining about the lack of air conditioning in the back of the SUV where she was sitting with the children. "I'm absolutely boiling back here," she said loudly. "Margaret, would you mind trading seats? You don't seem bothered by the heat." Though the front passenger seat was cooler and more comfortable, I agreed to switch. As I squeezed into the back beside my grandchildren, I noticed Emma rolling her eyes at Jackson. "Grandma smells like old perfume," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. I pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the scenery outside the window. Brian turned up the radio, drowning out any possibility of conversation. That night in Denver, over dinner at an upscale restaurant Diane had selected, the conversation turned to money. "So, Margaret," Diane began swirling her wine glass. "Brian tells me you're still listed on our house deed. That seems like an unnecessary complication at this point, doesn't it?" I carefully set down my fork. "I hadn't given it much thought," I replied honestly. "It was just a protection when I contributed to the down payment." "It's been 10 years," she pressed. "Property values in Paradise Valley have tripled. It would make things much cleaner if we could sort out that arrangement." Brian looked uncomfortable. "Diane, this isn't the time or place." "When is the right time?" she countered. "Your mother is here now, and we rarely see her. We should use this opportunity to tie up loose ends." The implication was clear. I was a loose end that needed tying up. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I'm happy to discuss it when we return from vacation, I offered. I never intended to complicate things for you. Diane smiled tightly. Wonderful. I'll have our lawyer draft something for you to sign. The atmosphere grew increasingly strained as we continued eastward. In Kansas, I overheard Diane whispering to Brian while they thought I was napping in the back seat. She's cramping our style, Brian. The kids are uncomfortable, and frankly, so am I. This was supposed to be our family vacation. She is family, Brian replied, though his defense lacked conviction. And she paid her way. Barely, Diane scoffed. Do you know what this trip is actually costing us? That $3,000 doesn't even cover her share. I kept my eyes closed, my heart breaking at the realization that I was considered an unwelcome burden rather than beloved family. Still, I resolved to make the best of the situation for the children's sake. The breaking point came in Missouri, just east of Kansas City. We stopped at a large gas station off the interstate to refuel and stretch our legs. The afternoon heat was oppressive, the humidity making it feel like we were walking through soup. I'm going to get some cold drinks, I announced, heading toward the convenience store. Does anyone want anything? Get some water bottles, Brian called after me, and maybe some snacks for the kids. Inside the air-conditioned store, I took my time selecting refreshments, grateful for the brief respite from the tension in the car. I chose drinks chips and some chocolate for the children. The line at the register was long, and by the time I paid and emerged into the parking lot, I was met with an incomprehensible sight. The SUV was gone. At first I thought Brian had merely repositioned the vehicle, perhaps moving to a parking spot from the gas pump. I walked around the entire gas station plastic bag of drinks growing warm in my hand, confusion giving way to concern. Had there been an emergency? Had they needed to rush somewhere and couldn't wait? But no, they would have come into the store to get me if that were the case. After 30 minutes of waiting in the sweltering heat, I accepted the unthinkable truth they had left me behind, deliberately. I tried calling Brian's cell phone. No answer. I left a voicemail, keeping my voice as calm as possible. Brian, it's Mom. I'm still at the gas station. Please let me know what's happening. I sent a text message. No response. An hour passed. Then 2. I sat on a bench outside the gas station, my clothes damp with sweat, my mind racing with possibilities. Had there been a misunderstanding? Had they somehow not seen me go into the store? But deep down, I knew better. I had heard the whispered conversations. I had seen the looks exchanged between Diane and the children. I was unwanted baggage, and they had found a way to lighten their load. Eventually, a kind truck driver noticed my distress and offered assistance. I explained that I'd been separated from my family and needed to find a place to stay for the night. He directed me to a modest motel a few miles away and even gave me a ride there. That night, alone in a strange motel room with only the clothes on my back and my purse, I finally received a text from Brian. Mom, so sorry about the mix-up. Diane thought you decided to fly home early. We'll wire you money for a plane ticket. Call when you get this. The lie was so transparent it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so painful. I had never mentioned changing plans. My suitcase was still in their car. My return ticket from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix was in my email. I didn't call Brian that night. Instead, I lay awake replaying every interaction over the past decade, seeing clearly, for the first time, how I'd been slowly but systematically pushed out of my son's life. And as dawn broke over the Missouri countryside, I made a decision that would change all of our lives. The next morning, I called a taxi to take me to the nearest car rental agency. Using my credit card, I rented a modest sedan and began the long drive back to Kentucky. I needed time to think, time to process the betrayal and decide my next move. During the 11-hour drive, I called Brian twice. Both times, the call went to voicemail. I left brief messages. I'm safe, we need to talk. By evening, I reached Louisville and the comfort of my own home. As I unlocked the front door, the familiar scent of lemon furniture polish and old books welcomed me back. Here, at least, I knew my worth. Here, I was not an inconvenience. I took a long shower, washing away the physical grime of the journey while trying to cleanse my mind of the emotional turmoil. Afterward, wrapped in my faded but comfortable robe, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and finally called my oldest friend, Patricia. They did what? Patricia exclaimed when I recounted the story. Margaret, that's not just rude, that's dangerous. You could have been stranded without resources. I had my purse, I said, trying to sound more composed than I felt. And credit cards. But yes, it was deliberate. They wanted me gone. What are you going to do? She asked. I took a deep breath. I'm still figuring that out, but I'm done being taken for granted. I'm done being the convenient ATM when they need money, and the inconvenient old lady when they don't. That night, I pulled out a file folder from my home office. Inside were all the documents related to the house in Paradise Valley, the original deed listing me as co-owner, the wire transfer receipt for my $200,000 contribution, and the property tax assessments showing how the value had indeed nearly tripled over the past decade. My name was still on the deed. Legally, I had as much right to make decisions about that property as Brian and Diane did. I had never exercised that right, trusting that my son would honor our understanding. That trust had been misplaced. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Howard Greenfield, who had handled my modest legal affairs for decades. Margaret, this is a complex situation, Howard said after I explained everything. Yes, you're a legal owner, but selling the property without their consent could be problematic. What are my options? I asked. You could force a partition sale through the courts, but that's a lengthy process, he explained. Or you could try to negotiate a buyout of your share, which would be substantial given the current market value. And if they refuse to negotiate, I pressed. Howard sighed. Then we look at legal remedies. But, Margaret, are you sure you want to take this route? This is your son we're talking about. My son, who abandoned his mother at a gas station and then lied about it, I reminded him. I gave him everything, Howard. Every opportunity, every advantage I could afford. And this is how he repays that devotion. After 3 days of deliberation and consultation with Howard, I made my decision. I would not immediately force a sale of the house, but I would use my legal leverage to ensure Brian understood the consequences of his actions. I called Brian one last time. This time, he answered. Mom, thank God. He said, his voice a mixture of relief and anxiety. We've been so worried. Did you get the money I wired? I didn't need your money, Brian. I made it home on my own. A pause. Look, I'm really sorry about what happened. There was a huge misunderstanding. Diane thought, Stop, I interrupted. We both know exactly what happened. You and Diane decided I was an inconvenience and left me stranded at a gas station. Then you concocted a ridiculous lie to cover your actions. Mom, it wasn't like that, he protested weakly. It was exactly like that. And now we need to discuss the house. His tone changed immediately. What about the house? I contributed $200,000 toward your down payment. The current market value of the property would make my share worth approximately $600,000. Mom, we can't possibly... I'm not asking for money, Brian. I'm informing you that I'm exploring my options as co-owner of the property. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Brian spoke, his voice tight with suppressed anger. You're threatening to sell our home, the home where your grandchildren live. I'm reminding you that actions have consequences, I replied calmly. You made a choice at that gas station in Missouri. Now I'm making mine. Diane was right about you, Brian hissed. You've always been manipulative, using money to control me. The accusation stung, but I held firm. I never asked for anything in return for my help except basic human decency and respect. You and Diane failed to provide even that. After ending the call, I sat in my living room surrounded by photos of Brian growing up, his first day of school, his high school graduation, his college ceremony where he'd hugged me tight and whispered, I couldn't have done this without you, Mom. Where had that grateful young man gone? How had he transformed into someone who could abandon his mother without a second thought? 3 days later, I received a call from Diane. Her usually polished voice was shrill with panic. How could you do this to us? She demanded without preamble. We've just received notice that you're initiating a partition sale of our home. Howard works quickly, I observed. Do you have any idea what this will do to the children? She continued. They'll lose their home, their school, their friends. I recall you asking me about tying up loose ends during our vacation, I replied. That's exactly what I'm doing. We were going to buy you out, she insisted. We just needed time to arrange the financing. You've had 10 years, I pointed out. And based on your recent behavior, I don't believe you ever intended to honor that agreement. Diane's tone shifted from angry to pleading. Margaret, please. We can work something out. Brian made a terrible mistake, but don't punish the whole family for it. For a moment, I wavered. Was I being too harsh? Would my grandchildren suffer for their parents' actions? Then I remembered sitting on that bench outside the gas station watching the sun set, as I realized my own son had deliberately abandoned me. I remembered the whispered comments, the eye rolls, the years of subtle dismissals. I'll have Howard call your lawyer, I said finally. We can discuss terms. The terms, as it turned out, were straightforward. I would proceed with selling the house unless they could secure financing to buy out my share at fair market value within 30 days. Given their financial situation, I knew this would be nearly impossible. Brian called again that evening, his voice breaking with emotion for the first time. Mom, please don't do this. We made a horrible mistake, but we can't lose our home. The kids are devastated. You should have thought about consequences before you drove away from that gas station, I replied, surprised at my own composure. Actions have consequences, Brian. That's a lesson I apparently failed to teach you adequately. What do you want from us? He asked desperately. An apology. Fine, I'm sorry. We're all sorry. What more do you want? I considered his question carefully. What did I want? Revenge. No, that wasn't it exactly. I wanted acknowledgement of my worth as a person, as a mother who had sacrificed everything for her child, only to be discarded when convenient. I want you to understand what it feels like to have something precious taken away without warning, I said finally. I want you to recognize that I am not a doormat to be walked over or an ATM to be accessed when you need money. I am your mother, and I deserved better. The house sold within 2 weeks to an all-cash buyer who offered $50,000 above asking price. After deducting my original contribution and my legal share of the appreciated value, I instructed Howard to wire the remainder to Brian and Diane. Are you sure about this? Howard asked. You're entitled to more given the circumstances. I don't want their money, I explained. I wanted them to understand that their treatment of me had real consequences. Brian and Diane were forced to quickly find a rental property, a significant downgrade from their luxurious Paradise Valley home. The children had to change schools mid-year. The financial cushion from the house sale would eventually allow them to buy another home, though not in the same exclusive neighborhood. I donated my share of the proceeds to a local women's shelter, finding unexpected healing and helping other women who had been discarded or mistreated by those who should have loved them most. The aftermath was exactly as painful as I had anticipated. Brian stopped speaking to me entirely. The twins, influenced by their parents' narrative, sent angry emails blaming me for ruining their lives. Extended family members took sides, with many criticizing my extreme response to what they characterized as a misunderstanding. Only Patricia and a few close friends stood firmly in my corner, understanding that my actions came not from vindictiveness, but from a place of profound hurt and a lifetime of giving without receiving even basic respect in return. 6 months after the house sale, I received a letter from Brian. It was brief, but significant. Mom, I'm still angry about the house, but I've had time to think about what happened on the trip. There's no excuse for what we did. We treated you terribly, not just at the gas station, but for years before that. I let Diane's attitude toward you influence my own behavior, and I failed to honor everything you sacrificed for me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I lost was far more valuable than a house. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. A recognition that relationships matter more than real estate and that treating people with dignity isn't optional, especially when those people have given you everything they had to give. In the year that followed, healing came slowly and in unexpected ways. The forced sale of the house created ripples that affected all our lives, some surprising even me. Brian and Diane separated 3 months after moving into their rental property. The stress of the move, the financial adjustments, and the underlying issues in their relationship proved too much to overcome. Brian moved into a small apartment closer to his office, while Diane and the twins remained in the rental house. I learned about the separation from Patricia, who had heard it through our small town's efficient grapevine. My first instinct was to call Brian to offer support during what must be a difficult time, but I hesitated, unsure if my reaching out would be welcomed or viewed as intrusion. The bridge between us was still fragile, held together by a single letter and years of complicated history. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I joined a community garden, finding unexpected joy in nurturing plants and forming connections with my fellow gardeners. I volunteered at the local library, reading to children during Saturday story hours. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see but had postponed visiting, believing there would be time later, perhaps with Brian and his family. I toured the Grand Canyon properly this time with a seniors group that moved at a comfortable pace and appreciated the majesty without rushing. I visited Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs, the very place I'd been denied seeing during that fateful road trip. Standing among the towering red rock formations, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I was living life on my terms, finally. The first tentative step toward reconciliation came from an unexpected source. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I answered a knock at my door to find Emma standing on my porch, soaking wet and clutching a small backpack. "Grandma," she said, her voice small, "can I come in?" At 14, Emma had shot up several inches and was beginning to lose her childish roundness. But her eyes were the same. A mirror of Brian's, a mirror of my own. Over hot chocolate, she explained that she'd taken a bus from Phoenix to Louisville, using money saved from birthdays and babysitting jobs. She hadn't told either of her parents where she was going. "They're going to be worried sick," I said, reaching for my phone. Emma grabbed my hand. "Please wait. I need to talk to you first." She told me about the past year, how the family had fractured in ways beyond the physical separation of her parents, how she'd overheard arguments about money, about blame, about me, how she'd discovered through accidentally opened mail that I had donated my share of the house proceeds rather than keeping the money. "Dad said you were just trying to hurt us," she confessed. "But then I found out you gave all that money away. That didn't make sense if you were just being mean." "It was never about the money, Emma," I explained gently. "It was about being treated like a person deserving of respect." "I know that now," she nodded. "I remembered how we treated you on that trip, how Mom would whisper things about you and Dad would just let it happen. And then, when they left you at that gas station," she looked down at her mug. "I knew it was wrong. I wanted Dad to go back, but Mom said you'd be fine, that you were manipulating us with guilt." The rawness of her honesty took my breath away. "It wasn't your fault," I assured her. "You were 12, following your parents' lead." "But I'm older now," she insisted, "and I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." After calling Brian to let him know Emma was safe with me, we arranged for her to stay the weekend. Those 3 days became a turning point for both of us. We baked cookies using my old recipes. We looked through photo albums of Brian as a child. We talked honestly about hurt feelings and misunderstandings. When Brian arrived to pick her up on Sunday, he looked exhausted but resolute. He stood awkwardly on the same porch where he'd played as a boy, a man now grappling with the consequences of his choices. "Thank you for taking care of her," he said formally. "She's my granddaughter," I replied simply. "Would you like to come in? I've made coffee." Over coffee at my kitchen table, Brian and I began the painful process of clearing away years of misunderstanding and hurt. He explained how Diane's resentment of my role in their lives had gradually poisoned his own perspective, how financial pressures and social climbing had warped their priorities, how the loss of the house had been a wake-up call about what truly mattered. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said. "What we did was unforgivable, but I hope in time we can find a way back to some kind of relationship." "I'd like that," I admitted. "You're my son." That never stopped being true, even when it hurt too much to acknowledge. The road to healing wasn't smooth or direct. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. Jackson took longer to come around than Emma, his anger at the disruption to his life harder to overcome. Diane remained distant, though civil, when circumstances required interaction. But gradually, carefully, Brian and I rebuilt a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation or financial dependence. He accepted a job transfer to Louisville 6 months later, moving into a modest house just 20 minutes from mine. The twins split their time between their parents, and my relationship with my grandchildren deepened as they spent weekends with me this time, by choice rather than arrangement. 1 year to the day after the gas station incident, Brian and I sat on my back porch watching fireflies dance in the summer twilight. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. Selling the house? I considered the question carefully. I regret that it came to that point, I answered honestly. I regret the pain it caused, especially to the twins, but I don't regret standing up for myself finally. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to show them that treating others badly has consequences. Brian nodded slowly. You taught me more in that one action than in all the years of advice and support. I just wish I'd learned the lesson sooner. It's never too late to learn, I said, patting his hand. That's something I discovered myself this year. Looking back now, I understand that what happened at that Missouri gas station was both an ending and a beginning. It ended the unhealthy dynamic where my love and support were taken for granted, where my worth was measured only by what I could provide. And it began a painful but necessary transformation for all of us, a stripping away of material facades to reveal what truly matters in family relationships: respect, honesty, and genuine care for one another. I sold a house, yes, but in doing so, I reclaimed my dignity and ultimately helped my son find his way back to the values I had tried to instill in him all along. That outcome, unexpected as it was, proved to be worth more than any real estate. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt someone you loved but was necessary for your own self-respect? How did you handle the aftermath? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of family healing, and share this with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve, even from those closest to you.